Okay, today we're here with my co-founder and partner at Etruscan Press, Professor Bob Mooney. Welcome, Bob.
Good to be here.
And Bob and I have been concocting schemes for the last 3 decades or so, and I think maybe our biggest scheme was Etruscan, which started out with a conversation with Bob and I and our third partner, who was the money behind all of this, Steve Orstaglio. But Bob, tell us about that conversation that got Etruscan kind of launched.
Right, and our biggest scheme, I would only say, wasn't Etruscan. It still is. And what we're doing right now is showing your students Etruscan. You know, it's not only a conversation that began it, it's remained a conversation largely between you and I, but we brought so many people into this conversation. You know, our writers, other folks who have come on the Etruscan wagon. I would say that conversation began when we met in earnest over your poems. I was the editor of MSS magazine at the time, which was a literary magazine of international renown begun by the American novelist John Gardner. And John was one of my mentors at Binghamton University. When he passed away, his widow took over the magazine, and I took it over for her. Enter Phil Brady with these gorgeous poems, and we just sat and began a conversation about poetry, fiction, nonfiction, literature. I was so impressed with Phil and his vision and his work that he joined me at MSS. And then years later, in this ongoing conversation, thanks to the generosity of Steve Orstaglio, who wanted in on something, we all concocted Etruscan, and we continue that conversation through the Etruscan Project, again, bringing on all these great folks and their wonderful work, which is just, the Etruscan conversation joining the literary conversation that's been going on for a couple thousand years now.
Right. And, the fact that, Bob, you're a novelist and I'm a poet, and that, that's been kind of the crux of our, of the questions that we bring to the table that feed our mission, which is basically our poetry and storytelling, fiction and prose. Are they two manifestations of the same impulse that just partake of different conventions and different traditions? Or are they two completely different activities that are joined by the technology of the alphabet, as different as music and then visual art, perhaps. And because of that, I think every press has to have some more or less flexible mission. You don't want to be so rigid that you're excluding work that you realize later, wow, that would have been really wonderful. But on the other hand, you just don't want to go in and pick things almost as they happen to occur. I remember talking to Johnny Temple, or this was actually during a panel, and I said, yeah, it's like a dance where I lead and then someone else comes back. And Johnny said, well, actually, in his case, he says, it's like I lead and then somebody kicks me in the head. I like that. so different approaches. But when you come across work, maybe a submission or something that we've already kind of decided on. Well, let's first talk about just the submissions. I mean, what is it that you would say to a new writer, say, somebody who hasn't been published? Say, what is you as an editor, what are you looking for, do you think? I know it's hard to describe, but.
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's an essential question. First, John Gardner, the American novelist that I work with, not only helped me to hone my own writing skills, he also taught me how to be an editor, and really his constitution, for editing was somewhat vague, for a writer to hear. It's like something that's beautiful for whatever it is, and the seasoned writer, editor is of course a voracious reader, and it's almost good that you can't explain, in solid declarative sentences exactly what it is you're looking for. We are looking for something. For me, it really begins with the basics. I often think of Gertrude Stein basically teaching Ernest Hemingway how to be Ernest Hemingway on the page. And she started with the sentence. She pretty much said, Ernest, it's about the sentence, stupid. you know and I'm sure that she would say the same thing about the poetic line,
Right.
depending on what genre you're looking at. But for us, it's a sentence. Actually, when I first started sending my work out, I got the attention of Michael Curtis, who at the time was the editor for the Atlantic Monthly magazine. So it was a big thing to get an Atlantic first. And he never accepted any. Well, he almost accepted one of my stories, but he always wrote back, which is a big thing. If you get a personal note from an editor, it means I like your work, even though I'm not taking this work. Keep me in mind. But he's got an essay that I would suggest all of you look up. I think it's easy to find online. It's called Publishers and Publishing. But I'll just read a few things of what he says. He was the fiction editor for decades at this very prestigious magazine, mountain of manila envelopes on one side, and he's looking at each of them. He would read all day. Why did he keep one for the maybe pile or put one on the yes pile, and then all those others rejected? He says what most editors look for, and this is true for me, in addition to respect for the conventional strengths of orderly composition, is a sentence or two sufficiently complex in structure and idea to signify a serious mind at work. Editors look for engaging sensibility, a writer with wit, imagination, and appreciation for the benefits of a well-constructed sentence. We look for fully developed characters, plausible situations, distinctive dialogue, and all that. But without evidence of being able to write sentences like that, there isn't a whole lot of editorial will for us to go on. And so it's a technical thing, but it's kind of like how some singers would say, it took them years to feel comfortable in a melody, to use the nuances and variations of tone to really sing well. And I think that that's true for the writers and sentences. It takes a lot of there are calisthenics for this. I have my students write sentences of no fewer than 300 words that help to build a particular emotion, and have that sentence be perfectly constructed, like one of those ancient bridges that are just held together by their own weight. It is a skill. It's not something that you either have or don't. It's something that you can develop through hard work. And I think it may be good news to you that it's almost that simple, because it's doable with hard work. Then comes the job of the rhythm of the sentences, making your work, whether it's poetry or fiction or nonfiction, to begin to see it in part as a musical score, that it has a musical quality because it rides on rhythm. All art rides on a rhythm, in the literary arts anyway. And then to know how to choreograph those sentences. And then, of course, it's the meaning and images and action and dialogue that you're putting through these. And you do have to have a good ear, to be able to do this. But that is what I tell young writers. That's how you begin. Begin with the unit of thought and feeling that is the sentence, and master that before you try to master the whole symphony. Know the note scales before you start writing, Jupiter symphonies.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's not just in terms of vision, but also in terms of just practicality. You know, when you mentioned the singers, you know, you can tell if somebody's a good singer. You don't need to listen to the whole song. You can tell right away the timbre of their voice and their ability to handle, you know, the difficulties that are incumbent in every cadence and every measure, not just the whole thing. And likewise, I know that for me as an acquisitions editor, if I'm looking through a pile of those now virtual manila envelopes, um, you know, I only need to read a very little part in order to figure out whether this person has some of those chops that you've been talking about. And I think that can be disconcerting for new writers who are used to being students. And of course, as a student, your professor is going to read everything that you write, and your mother's going to read everything that you write, and you're going to be, you know, you're going to be given respect and space. And I always tell, you know, students, I said, listen, an instructor, as a mentor, I'll come to you wherever you are in terms of your progression. And the only question to ask is whether you're getting better. But as an editor, your allegiance is not to that unknown writer, that person who is, you know, internationally unknown. It's your allegiance is to the press, and then the job of that writer is to somehow make my allegiance turn to that work. And until that happens, I have no obligation. And I know, you know, I think we feel the same way. You know, my only obligation at that point is to get done with, you know, this task. And I don't even necessarily have to worry too much about fairness. You know, I mean, the thing I oftentimes, you know, tell students, don't take rejection, you know, personally, because it could have to do with a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with your work, like seasonality. You know, whether I'm looking for something at a certain time of year and how much I've taken that may have to do with something. You know, for instance, I just came across a work that had a title that was very much like a title that we've already done. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not even going to read that one. You know, I just can't use it. So yeah, the sentence, going back to that, because that's the one thing that you can see right away. I mean, you know, the clarity of that voice. And of course, you deal not only with acquisitions, but one of the features of the press, and, you know, I think maybe its main feature, is the fact that once we do give our manuscripts that allegiance, you know, once we say we're going to take it, if it's a fiction manuscript, it will oftentimes, we'll be able to do that because we have the Mooney treatment, which is this, you know, arcane and comprehensive treatment of the text. That, just to give an example, I mean, we were able to take a book called 16, you know, by Auguste Courteau, brilliant book, but Auguste Courteau, his English is not his first language, and he had many of the quirks of an ESL speaker, even though very, very advanced and a brilliant guy. But we could afford to take that book knowing that you'd be working on it. Tell us a little bit about the Mooney treatment.
Well, first of all, you know, whenever you use the phrase Mooney treatment, you make me, it feels like I'm a methadone clinic or an MRI, you know?
That's kind of what it is, isn't it? You know?
Well, I would say with Auguste Courteau's novel, which we both kind of fell in love with the energy coming off the page, you know, and for me it was I could still see, first and foremost, even though there was some language interference, that English was not his native language, and yet he was writing in English. I could still see the architecture of the sentences had a complexity, a superiority to them. They were beautiful sentences with kind of intermingled with, you know, kind of the Queen's English and almost Cockney. And in conversation with him, I found out that he just had a variety of tutors in Greece to learn English, and I could tell that some of them were from East London and some of them, were working at Buckingham Palace, and he didn't know the difference. And in an odd way, that kind of added to the poetry of of his language. Gertrude Stein, whom I mentioned earlier, would love that. You know, finding a fresh way of using language. But also going back to you know the music metaphor that we've been using. You know, to me, it's not just singing on pitch. You know, that's a decent story, but I'm not really interested in decent stories just by way of their own. You know, this is competent, this is good, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm always looking for a story that almost shifts, however imperceptibly, the way that I thought I understood life. You know, it always has some of those moments where the hair on the back of your neck stands up.
Mm.
And so with the music in the sentence, it isn't just, oh, she has a good ear and she knows how to sing on key. It's what kind of emotions and what complex emotions can she run through this sentence or run through this verse, you know, and move you, you know, using common English language, the alphabet, you know, our ear, the sound, and suddenly it's like, oh my God, you know, you hear something, and you know, it's like that Rilke poem. You feel like my life has changed, or I must change my life after I read this. If I feel that something has that kind of spirit, even if it's not quite ready for, you know, Broadway, so to speak, um, that's what I'm looking for. But I think you're kind of hinting at something else. This is probably a dirty little secret for writers to hear. But editors are looking. Not only are they not your friends who are hoping, oh, please let this be good. We're looking for reasons to reject a manuscript.
Yeah.
Because it's in the way of finding that one we're looking for. That's the cold hard truth, and it may not be fair, but it's just in the sense that this is how literature gets out to a wider audience. Is your novel, are your poems, is your work of creative nonfiction going to be interesting to a wide range of total strangers to you? They have nothing invested in you in your life. They don't want to know you except through this work, and they either want to know you or they don't. And a lot of it has to do with, you know, the intensity, the literary weight that you're bringing sentence by sentence, your voice, the vision that is being worked out on the page, the idea that you're bringing the reader in to collaborate on the very story that you wrote in their reading. You know, so many writers that I read and reject, they're really not thinking of the reader. They're locked in their own vision. It's like they're sharing their daydreams, which are always out of context and so uninteresting. But when I read something that, you know, this, I don't know this writer doesn't know me, and we're meeting in this space and we're working together and we want to be. And when we're moving towards something that feels important, the writer was smart enough and good enough to bring me in halfway and keep me there. You know, and going back to the beginning of your novel or the beginning of your book of poems, I think of Saul Bellow, the Nobel laureate, American writer, who said, you know, the first pages of a novel have to instill a confidence in the reader that it's going to be worth 450 pages of this, or they're not going to go on. He said it's a lot like, you know, if you're in the operating room and you're about to have surgery and you smell alcohol on the breath of the anesthesiologist, you're not going under. And so it's not only creating that in page one, it's maintaining it and building it. And this is why this enterprise, this writing, is so difficult. And you have to have a passion for the difficulty. You have to love the problems and love the challenge of solving them with your wits and your mastery of craft. If you're living in terror of them, my God, get out. It'd be an awful life. If you love it, it's a great life.
Talking about that, the beginnings, Kaylee Jones, who runs Kaylee Jones Books, and the students, will hear from her. But she also runs the James Jones contest and has a lot of readers in that contest. People, they do what we do. They read, stacks of submissions. And she talks about the fact that so many people don't know where to begin. They begin kind of earlier than they need to, instead of, in the media, in the middle of things, medias res. And that's that sense that you say about being with the reader as opposed to wanting to explain everything for yourself, more or less, is really kind of evident right from the beginning. There's a certain transparency, and it doesn't mean accessibility. It doesn't mean you're dumbing down and making things easy for the reader. But the difficulty kind of has to be worth the expension of effort, because reading is effort. And you have to be getting something back. Another question I'd want to ask you is, for myself, editing, being an acquisitions editor, especially, in other words, reading submissions, has had a huge impact on my writing life, because everything that I get over here, every submission, good, bad, or indifferent, it has one quality that my writing does not have. It's finished. And therefore, a lot of times you're looking at it and saying, wow, and then you go back to your own desk, and what you have is not finished. And it can be paralyzing sometimes, and I know that for myself, that resulted ultimately in my changing the kinds of, it resulted in my writing a long poem. And when I had written that long book length poem, because I'd been reading all of this other stuff, I knew that it was different, because I felt like I tell people, I don't see the river, I don't know everything, but I've got my finger in the river, and I know the temperature and the flow of the speed, of whatever literature there is out there. And I'm wondering how you feel, how immersion in the work of others, whether it's, in the sense of acquisitions or in the sense of giving it the Mooney treatment, what impact has that had on your own writing life? Okay, I've lost the sound here. I lost your sound.
Yeah, that's a real good question, and I think it's mostly been positive in the sense that I read a lot of student work, and that's one level of editing, and then graduate student work. I've worked with in the Wilkes program with Marlon James and Maroe Ajiti, who have gone on to publish and win awards, not because of me, but just working with them. It's a whole different level. And then there's the press, and I think that I have had experiences such as yours where it can get you down a little bit. You're reading good finished work, and you're in the middle of your own work. But also, for me, it's a plus in that whatever you call the Mooney treatment, I've learned that I have to start listening to myself in stage 5 of my own work. If I can, as I did recently, actually with your editorial help, put a novel that I've been working on for a long time aside, and then I regather it and see it as if it's a submission, and say, oh, okay, this is publishable, but Mooney, what you need to do, says Mooney, is this. So I think for me, I've been able, it's taken time to kind of bifurcate my two literary endeavors, the writing, which is primary for me, and the editing, which in a sense is easier for me because it's always easier for us to see what another person's work needs or feel confident in that anyway. Um, and as long as I don't conflate them too much at the moment, and either enterprise can exhaust us into, falling into that trap. I think that by and large, it's been good. It's also been good because it's a wonderful way to talk with writers whose work you admire, around the work and beyond the work, and that can inspire in and of itself.
Right. Um, you know, when I think about the both the mission, the desire, and the accidents that come about that allow one to enter into the editorial world, the publishing world. I mean, when you think about you worked with John Gardner as a student, and that led to your participation in the magazine, and then his demise led to your taking over the magazine, and also to memorialize him. I mean, it was part of a tribute to your mentor. That gave you kind of a mission and a desire to do it. Likewise, I think about for myself, it was the YSU Poetry Center, which I started, and I was doing all, like you hosted so many readings when you were the director of the Lit House at Washington College, the literary house. And I was hosting so many readings here, and getting to know writers made me want to take the next step to, okay, reading is fun, or reading is great, but, how can we make this into a larger and more permanent enterprise that we wound up calling Etruscan? And I'm just curious how what you would say, except be lucky, to a young person, who had aspirations to enter the publishing world.
As a writer.
As a publisher. I mean, as a writer, I think you've already, you've talked about
Yeah.
this. What do you, as a writer, a person needs to master that thing called the sentence or the line. But, what about those folks who would say, you know what, I really enjoy that aspect? How, what kinds of things, as I say, aside from just being lucky, I mean, having good things happen, having friends who want to help you or whatever. I mean, any advice for the young publisher?
Yeah, I think, well, you have to know what you like, know what really moves you, have a generous editorial sensibility without being foolish. It is the kind of thing, I think the publishing world, whether as writer or editor or agent, um, is so attractive to a lot of people because it is so apparently welcoming, and it is. We're all welcome to this world, but it doesn't mean that we're all kind of equally enlightened once we're there. I tell my writers, as editors, and not only as writers, my students, literature really is a conversation. And if you're going in as an editor, you're given the keys to the ballroom, and inside the ballroom are, the Maxwell Perkins and the William Maxwells and the great editors, the Malcolm Cowleys. There's also Homer. It's like a cocktail party. He's there with his mead, and Joyce is there with his white wine, and Virginia Woolf is there. Eudora Welty has got her bourbon, and they're all in the conversation, and the editors are kind of keeping it going and giving it shape, calling them on one line or another. But it's a beautiful place to be, and you learning to go into this world and hold your own. Your job is to master craft, to read like crazy, to understand what moves you and why, and what you're looking for when you see it. Our job as teachers, editor teachers and writer teachers for folks like you, is to send you into that room prepared, First, don't make an ass out of yourself. Know what you're talking about. Have read their work and join the conversation to which you are welcome. But don't be endured, be treasured. And the work that needs to be done is hard. It's ongoing, it's daily. But if you feel that compulsion, you want to be a part of this and hold your own, I think you're getting a real good idea from the folks that you're talking with this semester on how to prepare for that. That's the good news. Perhaps the bad news is it's going to take a huge chunk of every day of your life. It is a life. And whether you want it to be your life or not, again, it's our job to show you what's involved. It's your job to decide whether you want to be a part of that and do what you need to do to be a part of it or not. And there's no good or bad decision except for you and your nature and what you owe yourself.
Bob Mooney, novelist, teacher, retiring professor at Washington College, and co-founder and executive editor at Etruscan Press. Thank you, Bob.
And brother in literature with one Phil Brady, and happy to be so.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay.